everyone, welcome to another video for SimonsStamp.com. Today I'm starting out with some watercolor paper from Simons Stamp, and I'm going to be using this stamp set for my favorite things. This is the Peaceful Wildflower stamp set. I'm just arranging that on the watercolor paper. This watercolor paper is cut to 3 1/4 wide by 5 1/2 tall, and I just arranged that on there, and then I'm using my compact stamp press to pick them all up at the same time so that I can stamp them in the arrangement that's going to fit on the watercolor paper. So I stamped these in Versamark ink, and I didn't show this in the video, but previous to stamping these, I ran the the Inkadinkado Embossing Magic powder bag over the surface of that watercolor paper because I am going to be embossing. So I'm using some Hero Arts white embossing powder, just sprinkling that on, and I've put some scratch paper down underneath so it will catch all the embossing powder. So just shake that off and then use my heat tool to melt the embossing powder. You just want to heat it until it's melted. And then since I already had the embossing supplies out, I decided to go ahead and do the sentiment. The sentiment says, "May you find peace this day." I thought it really went well with the flowers and it would make a really good sympathy card. So I'm stamping that on some vellum, some Basil 40-pound vellum. And I also prepped the vellum with that same Inkadinkado Embossing Magic powder bag. So I'm just stamping the sentiment in some Versamark ink, and I sprinkled on some of that same embossing powder from Hero Arts. Shake it off, and then heat set it just until it was melted. You want to make sure you don't hold the heat tool to the vellum too long because vellum will warp even more than regular paper. So after I was done with the embossing, I trimmed out that sentiment and then funneled in the leftover embossing powder back into the container. So I'm going to be using 3 different distress ink colors. I'm using Scattered Straw, Tumble Glass, and Shaded Lilac. I'm starting out with Scattered Straw, and I'm just pressing that onto my craft sheet. This craft sheet is just a slick surface that's really great for water techniques or just as a everyday surface beneath your projects. But I like to use it in particular for this technique with distress inks. And if you don't have a craft sheet like this, you can use a page protector or anything that's like a really slick surface, like a transparency, something like that. Just anything that's going to help that water and ink bead up on the surface. So I just did 3 bands of color. I want to kind of have a little bit of a gradient on the watercolor piece. So I kept those colors kind of just all in bands. And then I used some water and spritzed that on. I'm using the 2-ounce mister from Ranger just to spray on some water. And you notice how big those water droplets are? Those are really, really big. Take note of how big those are. You'll see what I do in a minute here in comparison. So I'm just pressing my stamped piece down onto that ink face down, and I'm squishing it and really wiggling it to get the ink to kind of move around. Then when I pick it up, it has a little bit of a faded background, a little bit of a gradient. And I dried that with my heat tool, but you'll notice it's really, really pale, and I wanted it to stand out a little bit more. So I cleaned off my work surface. I just used a cloth or a baby wipe to clean that off. I added 3 more bands of color. And then when I go to spray it this time, I'm misting it only really lightly. And you'll notice that those water droplets are a lot tinier. That means I use less water. So the ink won't be so watered down. It will be a little bit more intense. And layered on top of what we've already done, it will give it a lot more color. And I really wanted that color to stand out because the embossing was in white. And without it standing out, you really couldn't see the flowers. So that turned out lots better. I can see the flowers now. And to clean up that water droplet at the bottom, I just press a dry cloth to that corner just to pull out any of that extra water that's dripping to the bottom. And then I didn't heat set it, but I just heated it to dry it. Then I got some white cardstock. This is Basil Marshmallow, and I cut it to be 3 1/4 wide. And then I'm scoring it at 5 1/2. That's so it's the exact size of our watercolor piece. However, I did cut down the watercolor piece a little bit. So at this point, when I'm adhering it to the card front with some Tombow Stamp Runner, it's actually 4 3/4 tall. But you'll notice here in a minute that I put it down that there's got that weird little watercolor edge in the corner from where I cleaned things up with that cloth. And so I actually trimmed that off, and so now it's 4 1/2 tall. So this is a smaller card than usual, but it's still really pretty, and it does fit into a standard envelope. So if you wanted to put this in an envelope, put it through the mail or something like that, you could put in a 4¼ by 5½ inch piece cardstock in the envelope first for stability, and then put the card in the envelope. So just wrapped that vellum piece around the bottom portion of the card, and I'm going to adhere it down on the inside of the card, just folding down one flap and then adhering or putting more adhesive over the top, and then folding down the other flap. And that'll make it so the vellum sticks to the card without it showing on the front. I then took my corner chomper and I corner rounded the top corners of the card just because those areas were a little bit more blank, and so I wanted to have a rounded edge up at the top. And that is the card for today. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I will catch you guys next time. Thanks so much for watching.